We all know about vampires, from the grungy Lost Boys to sparkly Twilight, but whether you prefer creatures born of men's nightmares or a teenage girl's dream, it's undeniable that vampires are now romantics. But how did this happen? I believe that the answer lies with the vampire king himself, Dracula. Throughout the past century, countless movies have given us many different versions of the bloodsucker, but there is a distinct point of no return with Gary Oldman's portrayal in the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. By examining this movie and the major changes it's made compared to previous portrayals, we can see how, and more importantly, why Dracula has changed from a creature of the night to the creature of our hearts. First and foremost, allow me to highlight the movies that I will be referencing. All citations will be in the bottom right corner as well, so that you know where the scene or image you are viewing came from. And with that, let's move on. Examining previous scholarship, we can see that most authors have put an emphasis on Nosferatu and Dracula 1931 as the starting point of Dracula in film, and Bram Stoker's Dracula as the point of change from monster to romantic. Oldman's portrayal of Dracula is a stark difference to previous iterations, due to the fact that his desires, namely finding his lost love in Mina, make him question his own morality. The previous Draculas never experienced this internal conflict, their desires being to feed and multiply, and all other characters are merely pawns. This stark difference in characterization is because the previous movies focused on either Dracula or the male protagonist. In these movies, it's simply good versus evil. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, the movie chooses to focus on its female protagonist, and how Dracula behaves because of her. We see in different scenes how Dracula is more than happy to relinquish all that he is to her, and how she's the ultimate driving force of the movie. Before getting into why these changes happened, it's important to know why cinema is the only way this transformation could have happened. Cinema allows us to stay close to the literary text while also subtly presenting a whole new viewpoint. What the camera sees and emphasizes is very important, as it helps us understand the perspective the movie wants to show us. Even if the book is followed word for word, how each shot is set up and portrayed can give us a sense of foreboding, loneliness, warmth, etc. From this, Dracula can be reinvented endlessly. Reinvention is actually a big part of the reason why we are so obsessed with him. Dracula can embody whatever it is we need him to embody. In the early 1900s, he was a vessel for xenophobia and a punisher to the sexually deviant. In the late 1900s and after, he's a man who would do anything for those he loves. To understand why there's such a stark change between the Draculas, we need to look to social contexts during the 1900s. The early 1900s saw a predominantly male society, especially in Hollywood. Most movies displayed something called the male gaze, where the camera work often appeals to male fantasies of sex, power, revenge, or heroics. Women are also sidelined, they're solely for the man, and ultimately unimportant. An easy way to spot the male gaze is to ask, can any woman take her place or her role, or is it her that's important? Looking at Dracula, we can see this is the case. Mina in the Dracula 1931 movie could be replaced by any girl. Change the name, the look, and most importantly the personality, and it won't affect the story at all. Dracula would still chase her, and the men would still try to defend her. The same could be said of Nosferatu, the woman is interchangeable. In the 1960s, second-wave feminism began to sweep the nation, and we saw a gradual shift in focus from male perspectives to female ones. With women slowly becoming equals, their perspectives became more valued, and the female gaze began to make its way into Hollywood. That term, the female gaze, was coined by Laura Mulvey in 1975 in Visual Pleasure and the Narrative Cinema, and isn't a direct opposite to the male gaze, but rather a response. It asks the audience to see women as equals to men. The women in these movies are irreplaceable, and all characters, including the men, are given the space to feel emotions. There's a focus on the effects of our actions, internal conflict, and tension building, which makes the actions of the characters that much more meaningful. The different gazes are displayed through how the camera talks to us, what it focuses on, how the lighting and shots are set up. In this way, cinema is what brings the female gaze to life and allows the audience to experience the stories in a way that they never have before. Oldman's Dracula is under the female gaze. Mina was his driving force, and she herself is irreplaceable. He must have her and only her, but to do so he has to ask her to die and be cursed to his eternal hell. He values her too much to not just selfishly take her, and it isn't until she's begging him does he give in, and even then, it's still with resistance.
I love you too much to continue.
From Mina's perspective, she's betrothed to Jonathan, but doesn't feel a connection with him. She wants intimacy, but Jonathan puts his pursuit of money and status over her concerns. Dracula is the complete opposite. Mina doesn't have to be someone else around him. He gives himself freely to her, even within the first few minutes of meeting her.
I am your servant.
So now Mina has to choose. Does she pick the man she's unhappy with because it's the socially acceptable thing, or does she chase the one that she loves? Because Mina is front and center, not only for the audience but for Dracula, it becomes easier to apply the female gaze and thus allow the characters to explore their emotions for each other. But of course, like most stories, it's not just one aspect that influences how we view Dracula. The female gaze does the heavy lifting, setting Dracula up to be romantic through examining his emotions, but he still has to follow through with the setup. Dracula isn't your typical Hallmark hunk, and knowing that he's flawed can be significantly more attractive than perfection. In that same vein, his attraction could be that he's just not a man. He may have good looks, power, and financial security, but he would throw it all away for Mina. It's all worth nothing without her. In reality, few men would ever do such things, and even in the movie the human men won't. That level of devotion is more easily applied to monsters, and can be incredibly attractive. But attraction may also just come from being able to relate to the character. Dracula is tossed out from society, rejected for who he is, and a lot of people can relate to that. But ultimately, we see him learn how to love, and most importantly, that he can be loved.
I love.
She still loves him. So for some, Dracula being a romantic option allows them to say that they too can find love. In the end, Dracula has become a romantic figure because second-wave feminism that took place in the 1900s allowed for the female gaze to enter into Hollywood, giving new depth and nuance to the character, and allowing him to be capable of loving and being loved, despite his monstrous nature. The female gaze allowed Ullman's Dracula to experience a narrative driven by internal conflict and a question of morals themselves, rather than a strict good versus evil. This conflict is incited by Mina in her own struggles with love. With her as his in the movie's focus, as his equal that he would be willing to sacrifice anything for, we can see how Bram Stoker's Dracula took a monster and made him a romantic, and how from that point forward, Dracula was never the same.